Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Victor inhaled deeply as he stood at the entrance of his small workshop, the familiar scent of wood shavings and old parchment filling his lungs. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the cobblestone streets of the ancient city. This was his world, a place where every soul was born with a unique mask, a tangible extension of one's true identity. For as long as he could remember, Victor had been fascinated by these masks, by the way they reflected the essence of the wearer's soul, revealing secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface. He closed the door behind him and glanced around the cluttered room, filled with half-finished masks, tools of his trade, and scrolls containing the wisdom of mask makers who had come before him. His own mask, an intricately carved piece of silver with delicate patterns that mimicked the veins of leaves, lay on a wooden table in the center of the room. It had been with him since he was a child, a constant companion that defined who he was and how others saw him. Victor walked over to the table, intending to place the finishing touches on a commission he'd been working on all day. But as his hand reached out, he froze. His mask was gone. A cold knot of fear twisted in his stomach as he frantically searched the room, overturning tools and scattering parchment in a desperate attempt to find it. But no matter how hard he looked, his mask was nowhere to be found. Panic began to set in, his breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Without his mask, he was nothing, faceless, without identity, invisible to the world around him. He stumbled to a nearby mirror, hoping against hope that it had somehow slipped from his mind and was still there, resting on his face. But the reflection that stared back at him was unfamiliar, a blank canvas where his identity had once been. The sight was jarring, a stark reminder of how much he had come to rely on the mask to define who he was. Victor slumped against the wall, his mind racing. How could this have happened? Masks didn't just disappear, they were bound to their owners, a part of their very souls. The thought of losing his mask, of becoming one of the faceless, was terrifying. The faceless were the outcasts of society, shunned and feared by all, for they were believed to be cursed, their souls forever lost to the void. But Victor was no ordinary man. He was a mask craftsman, someone who had dedicated his life to understanding the intricate connection between the soul and the mask. If anyone could unravel the mystery of his mask's disappearance, it was him. But to do so, he would have to venture into the unknown, to places where few dared to tread. Victor straightened, determination hardening in his chest. He couldn't stay here, wallowing in fear. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. The city's ancient archives, a vast repository of knowledge buried deep beneath the earth, held the secrets of the past, secrets that might help him understand what had happened. Gathering what little courage he had left, Victor threw on a cloak to conceal his face and left his workshop, slipping through the darkened streets like a shadow. The city was alive with the sounds of night, distant laughter, the clatter of hooves on stone, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. But Victor paid them no mind. His focus was singular, his path clear. The entrance to the archives was hidden in plain sight, an unassuming door set into the side of a crumbling building. Victor pushed it open and descended a spiral staircase, the air growing cooler and more still with each step. The archives were vast, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers filled with ancient tomes, scrolls, and relics. Few ever ventured here, for the knowledge it contained was both sacred and dangerous, guarded by those who understood its true power. Victor made his way to the heart of the archives, where the oldest and most forbidden texts were kept. The air was thick with dust, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of parchment as he searched for what he needed. Finally, he found it, a scroll that spoke of the origins of the masks, of how they were crafted by a long-forgotten order of artisans who had the power to see into the soul's true nature. As Victor read, he began to understand. The masks were not just symbols, they were created from fragments of the wearer's soul, bound together by the craftsmanship of the mask maker. The process was sacred, a ritual that had been lost over time, replaced by a more mechanical, less spiritual approach. But the scroll hinted at something more, a deeper, darker secret about the nature of the masks, one that had been deliberately hidden. The words on the scroll were cryptic, but they pointed to a place, a temple on the outskirts of the city, where the first masks had been crafted. If Victor wanted to uncover the truth, he would have to go there, to delve into the past and confront whatever lay within. Victor rolled up the scroll and tucked it into his cloak. His heart was pounding, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through his veins. This was it, the beginning of his journey, a quest to reclaim his identity and uncover the secrets of the soul. He left the archives and made his way to the outskirts of the city, where the buildings grew sparse and the land wild. The temple was hidden among the trees, a crumbling ruin that had been forgotten by time. Vines crept up its stone walls, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. Victor approached the temple cautiously, his senses on high alert. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight that filtered through cracks in the walls. Ancient carvings adorned the stone pillars, depicting scenes of mask makers at work, their faces serene and focused. He walked deeper into the temple, following the path laid out by the carvings. The further he went, the more he felt a strange energy in the air, a presence that seemed to watch him from the shadows. It was as if the temple itself was alive, aware of his intrusion. Finally, he reached a chamber at the heart of the temple, its walls lined with ancient tools and relics. In the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which lay a broken mask. Victor's breath caught in his throat as he approached it, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed the mask, a wave of energy surged through him, filling his mind with visions. He saw the lives of the ancient mask makers, their dedication to their craft, their reverence for the souls they served. He saw how they had poured their own essence into the masks, binding them to the souls of others, creating a connection that was both beautiful and terrifying. But he also saw something else, something dark and hidden. A shadow that lurked at the edges of the visions, a presence that whispered of secrets too dangerous to be revealed. The ancient mask makers had discovered something about the nature of the soul, something that had driven them to abandon their craft and bury their knowledge deep within the temple. Victor staggered back, his mind reeling from the visions. He now understood that his mask was more than just a piece of his soul, it was a key to something greater, something that had been hidden for centuries. But to unlock it, he would need to repair the broken mask, to bind the fragments together as the ancient mask makers had done. He took the broken mask and began the painstaking process of repairing it. It was a delicate task, requiring not just skill but a deep connection to his own soul. As he worked, he felt the presence in the temple grow stronger, watching him, testing him. It was as if the temple itself was judging his worthiness, determining whether he was fit to uncover its secrets. Hours passed as Victor worked, his focus unbroken despite the weight of the task. Finally, the mask was whole again, its surface smooth and unmarked, a reflection of his own soul. But just as he was about to place it on his face, the air in the chamber shifted, growing colder, heavier. A figure materialized before him, a spectral being with a mask of its own, its features obscured by shadows. It was the guardian of the temple, a remnant of the ancient order, bound to protect the secrets of the masks. "You have done well," the guardian said, its voice echoing in the chamber. "But before you can claim your mask, you must prove your worth." Victor's heart pounded in his chest as the guardian approached, its presence overwhelming. "How do I prove myself?" he asked, his voice trembling. "By confronting the truth of your soul," the guardian replied. You must face the fragments of yourself that you have hidden, the pieces that you have buried deep within. The guardian raised a hand, and the chamber around them shifted, dissolving into darkness. Victor found himself standing in a void, surrounded by echoes of his own thoughts and memories. The guardian's voice whispered in his ear, guiding him through the darkness, "Your mask is a reflection of your soul, but it is not the whole truth. To reclaim it, you must embrace all that you are, even the parts you fear." Victor closed his eyes and allowed the memories to wash over him. He saw his childhood, the moments of joy and pain, the choices he had made that had shaped who he was. He saw the fear that had driven him to become a mask maker, the need to understand the souls of others because he was too afraid to confront his own, but he also saw the strength that had carried him through, the determination to uncover the truth, even when it was painful. He saw the love he had for his craft, the passion that had driven him to create masks that were not just beautiful but meaningful. As he embraced these memories, the darkness around him began to lift, replaced by a warm, golden light. The fragments of his soul, once scattered and broken, began to come together, forming a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. When he opened his eyes, the void had vanished, and he was back in the chamber, the guardian standing before him. The mask in his hands felt different now, heavier, more real. It was no longer just a piece of his soul, it was a symbol of everything he had become. "You have proven yourself," the guardian said, its voice softer now. "But there is one final test." Victor looked up at the guardian, his heart steady. "What is it?" "You must choose," the guardian said. "You can complete the mask and return to your old life, or you can destroy it and embrace a new identity, free from the constraints of the past." Victor hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The mask in his hands was a part of him, a reflection of everything he had worked for, everything he had become. But at the same time, it was a reminder of the fear and doubt that had held him back, the pieces of his soul that he had hidden away. He took a deep breath and made his decision. With a steady hand, he raised the mask above his head and brought it down with all his strength, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The guardian watched in silence as the fragments fell to the ground, each one dissolving into light as it touched the floor. The air in the chamber grew warmer, brighter, as if the very walls were alive with energy. Victor felt a sense of peace wash over him, a calm he had never known before. He had made the right choice. He had let go of the mask, of the identity that had defined him for so long, and in doing so, he had freed himself from its constraints. The guardian nodded, a gesture of approval. "You have chosen wisely. You are no longer bound by the past. Your soul is free." Victor smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He had completed his journey, uncovered the truth, and in doing so, had found himself. He was no longer the mask maker, no longer defined by the mask he wore. He was simply Victor, a soul who had embraced all that he was. He turned and left the chamber, the guardian's presence fading as he walked. The temple doors creaked open, and he stepped out into the sunlight, the warm rays washing over him like a blessing. As he made his way back to the city, Victor felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He no longer needed a mask to define who he was. He was free to be himself, to explore the world without the constraints of an identity imposed by a mask. When he returned to his workshop, he found it just as he had left it, filled with unfinished masks and tools of his trade. But now, it felt different. The masks no longer held the same power over him. They were beautiful, yes, but they were not who he was. Victor smiled and began to pack away his tools. He no longer needed them. His journey was complete, and it was time to move on, to embrace a new life, free from the constraints of the past. As he closed the door to his workshop for the last time, Victor felt a sense of excitement for the future. He was no longer bound by the masks, no longer defined by the identity they represented. He was free, and the world was full of possibilities. He walked through the streets of the city, the familiar sounds of life filling his ears. But now, they felt different. The city was no longer just a place where he lived and worked, it was a world full of opportunities, a world where he could be anything he wanted to be. Victor smiled as he walked, his heart light. He had found the truth of his soul, and in doing so, had found himself. The masks were no longer necessary, for he had become something greater, something more than the sum of his parts. He was Victor, and he was free.